conservation program, according to the most recent information. You've said that addressing this issue is an important issue for you. Can you explain why the department is failing to meet those service standards?
So, colleagues, I just want to say the voting period has now started. We're 15 seconds into it. Minister, if you'd like to offer a brief response, then we'll suspend and vote. And then
I would just say that is incorrect information, and that the service standards have been met within a large portion of the target. I think I'm not sure if President Gideon is here. The department works really closely, though, with programs or applicants, if you will, that haven't fully fleshed out their application yet. And so in those cases, those applications can take longer because they are not complete. And so the department works with those applicants to ensure that they have a successful return. But with applications that are complete and submitted for decision, those decisions are by and large returned in time.
Okay, and we're over a bit there. So, colleagues, I'm going to suspend. When I get confirmation that everybody's voted, we'll come back and go for the last 5 minutes to the Liberals, and then we'll end this session and switch panels and send our first guests on their way. So, for the moment being, we're suspended. Finishing off now with one last 5-minute question, and Mr. Carr is going to take that, or Mr. Batiste. Okay.
I have two questions. First, Minister, I would like to get an update. We've heard often at this committee that the Indian Act continues to discriminate around the second generation cutoff, as well as when First Nations mothers have children, and if they don't declare the father, then they automatically presume that child is not a status Indian. I know that our government is taking steps to remedy that. I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of a progress update on where we are in addressing the racism that still remains within the Indian Act, and a little bit about the housing progress that we've made. I know that the Auditor General has come out with a report, but I also know that we've significantly increased the amount of houses that are going to Indigenous communities, and I'm just wondering if you could give us the numbers and give us an update to get a full picture of what our government's response has been to Indigenous housing.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, MP Batiste, for being with me when we announced the beginning of the consultation process for the second generation cutoff. And so for members that are unaware of this issue, this is something deeply personal for many Indigenous people who, through one reason or another, have lost status, and therefore their children lose status. And so those consultations are actually being designed with Indigenous people, so they are of utmost sensitivity. There are a lot of opinions. There are people that feel very strongly that we need to move quickly on second generation cutoff. I think some communities have other perspectives where they have seen people return to community and wondered how they're going to absorb new members for a whole host of reasons. So those consultations are going to be very important, I think, to hear all sides and to come up with a path that keeps people very comfortable with the direction. But you're right, the ongoing gender discrimination in the Indian Act is something that we've been working since 2015 to fix, and Bill C-38 is now working its way through the House, as I understand it, and we'll have a debate, I believe, later this week on C-38. So I look forward to all members supporting that legislation and not delaying it, because indeed families are waiting for answers. So thank you for bringing that up. On Indigenous-led housing, I will note an article recently out of Nova Scotia, actually, that Member 2 First Nation is building a record number of new homes, but all of its local contractors are too busy for more. And I think that's a really important acknowledgement that it's not only money that is the limiting factor for building more houses. I did speak about ice roads and the delay and interruption in getting materials to First Nations communities, but skilled tradespeople shortages. There are a number of other things that actually can delay infrastructure development in communities. And sometimes it can be even related to climate change. If a community is evacuated in the middle of infrastructure season, it can just upend the entire season, and communities will lose the season or lose the progress they've made. And it can be very expensive when communities lose the progress, because, of course, a half-built housing complex left to the elements can actually mean that build has to be, in many cases, can't be salvaged. So I know that we have a long ways to go, but I will say that under this approach, we are looking at, I think, much faster progress. I do want to turn to Nelson a bit to talk about how we supported even quantifying the gap.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I want to acknowledge two things. One is success is measured not only in bricks and mortar, and there's been $2.3 billion spent since 2015 in housing specifically, and another $2 billion to follow. 20,000 projects are underway or will be completed by 2025. But partnership is also essential. I want to acknowledge and highlight the partnership and the co-development with the Assembly of First Nations on the First Nations housing and related infrastructure strategy. This was led by the First Nation, by the Assembly of First Nations, but also Indigenous Services Canada worked with all First Nations in 2022 to quantify the infrastructure gap. The infrastructure gap that was cited by the Auditor General is work that came from First Nations. And it's important to understand those needs, but it's also important to understand the partnership that's required in order to close the gap. The gap is substantive. We're seeing success, but success needs to follow the partnership model that this department believes so strongly in. So I want to thank you for your question. I'm pleased to kind of acknowledge the work that we have, but also want to lift up the success of First Nations in supporting the infrastructure in their communities. Thank you.
I don't think I have many seconds left, so that's it. Let's go. Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Minister, and your team for being here today. I apologize for the disruptions from the votes, but that's the nature of the business here. With that, colleagues, we will suspend and bring in the second panel. So, Ms. Ashton, just stand by, and we'll get going again as soon as we get everybody seated here. And for the moment. The meeting back to order. And I'd like to now thank or welcome our second panel. We have for the second hour, we're going to continue our discussion of the subject matter of the Supplementary Estimate C 2023-2024. We have the ministers, Gary Ann and Sangari, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, and the Honourable Dan Vandel, Minister of Northern Affairs. And from the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, I'd like to welcome Valerie Gideon, Deputy Minister, Martin Reiher, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Treaties and Aboriginal Government. We've spent a lot of time with you over the past while. Welcome back. Garima Dwivedi, Assistant Deputy Minister, Resolution and Partnerships. Georgina Lloyd, Assistant Deputy Minister, Northern Affairs. Krista Apps, Director General, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Secretariat. And Darlene Bess, Chief Finances, Results and Delivery Officer. And I apologize if I messed anybody's names up. We will go through a couple of rounds of questions here and see where we're at. But I believe, first of all, we have opening statements from both ministers. And not sure who's going first. Whenever you're ready, either Minister Vandal or Sangari, the floor will be yours for 5 minutes. I'll use a handy card system, yellow, 30 seconds left, red, time's up. Wind up your thought, and we'll move on to the next person. Minister Vandal, it looks like you're ready, so the floor is yours.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Tansi Udlakut, Kwekwe. I'm very happy to be here today to discuss and answer your questions on the 2023-24 supplementary estimates for Northern Affairs. The estimates reflect a net increase of $9 million for Northern Affairs. This increase in funding was used to address urgent capacity requirements for Indigenous organizations in the Northwest Territories due to wildfires and to reimburse expenses incurred to support their members during the wildfire emergency. Les communautés nordiques et
Northern and Indigenous communities are experiencing some of the most devastating effects of climate change. We are working with Northern and Indigenous partners to mitigate the impacts while helping communities reduce their dependence on expensive diesel through new community-managed renewable energy sources.
Solar and wind projects are leading the way in the clean energy transition with active support and investment from the federal government. In 2023, the government of Northwest Territories reported residents, communities, and territorial governments saved more than $12 million in energy costs because of clean energy projects like these right across the North. Partnerships and collaboration are a vital piece to strengthening food security in northern and Arctic communities. Since 2021, we have expanded the Nutrition North program and implemented 90% of the recommendations from this committee's report on food security in northern and isolated communities. This is a significant step, and I want to thank all the members, past and present, for their work and their continued collaboration on addressing this complex issue. Engagement with communities and program partners led to the launch of food sovereignty programs like the Community Foods Programs and the Harvester Support Grant. Internally, we reallocated an additional $5 million to Nutrition North Canada through SUP Estimate C to support these initiatives, which help to offset costs of food and other essential items, improve traditional access to traditional country foods, and support initiatives such as Meals for Elders and the school food programs. There is certainly much more work that needs to be done, and I look forward to engaging on a local level in communities with program partners in the upcoming months to find new ways to address food insecurity in the North and strengthen these partnerships. As a government, we have recognized the significant underfunding by past governments of all stripes when it comes to addressing housing and infrastructure gaps in the North. That's why we're working with Northern and Indigenous partners to increase access to safe, affordable housing and build on historic distinctions-based investments that are supporting the housing priorities in the territories and in Inuit Nunangat. On this note, I'd like to recognize and acknowledge the historic signing of the Nunavut Devolution Agreement, one of the largest land transfers in Canada's history that will support that supports Nunavummiut self-determination. We will keep working in partnership to complete the transfer of responsibilities by April 1st, 2027. Le cadre stratégique pour l'Arctique.
The Arctic and Northern Policy Framework helps to ensure sustainable management of northern lands. Previous assessments have enabled evidence-based decisions to be made regarding oil and gas offshore the Arctic. And the aim here is to support responsible and sustainable development of natural resources in the North and Arctic. In doing so, the highest safety and environmental standards have been observed.
And steadfast in defending the Arctic and the people who live there. We are working with northern partners and communities to co-develop security strategies to make making historical investments to increase our ability to defend the North. So thank you for providing me with the opportunity to provide a summary of how these supplementary estimates will support the important work ahead to deliver on our shared priorities to build a strong, resilient future for the North and the Arctic. Kuyanamik, Miigwech, thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Right to the second. Well done.
Perfect.
And now we'll go to our second minister, Minister Anand Sangari. And whenever you're ready, Minister, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Kwekwe, Udlaku Tanzi, hello and bonjour. Mr. Chair, thank you for the invitation to join you here on the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. And I do want to note that I'm very glad to be back at this committee and to be able to speak to all of you here. I'm joined here by the Honourable Dan Vandal, as well as officials from Saranac you introduced earlier, including Valerie Gideon, our Deputy Minister. Let me start with a few words about the journey of reconciliation we're on together with Indigenous partners, with all of you on this committee who advance this work each and every day, with Ministers Vandal, Haidu, and with all of our colleagues in Parliament. It's an important journey toward taking a system that was set up to implement the Indian Act, enforce the residential school system, and ultimately assimilate Indigenous peoples, and instead make that very system deliver results for Indigenous peoples. This is no easy task. It requires undoing hundreds of years of colonial history. 2015 was a turning point in Crown-Indigenous relations. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission handed us a roadmap to reconciliation through the 94 calls to action. And Canadians elected a government that pledged its most important relationship was the one it had with Indigenous peoples. Together with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the former approach of making decisions on behalf of Indigenous peoples has shifted dramatically and irrevocably to an approach centered on supporting the aspirations of Indigenous people and communities, or in other words, Indigenous self-determination. Today, we're in a new era of Indigenous relations, characterized by spending on resolving historical injustices, and recognizing and supporting Indigenous governments in advancing their goals. Or in other words, the painful path we've come from and the road that lies ahead. On the road ahead, I see hope. I see hope from the agreements that give Indigenous peoples control over what they always should have had control over: their lands, waterways, their governments, child welfare, education. In places like the Nisga'a Nation territory, I've seen how modern treaty has the power to deliver real results. I see hope in the form of rights recognition. Last month with the Haida Nation, I was honored to be in the Senate to witness the introduction of Bill S-16, recognizing the Council of the Haida Nation as the holder of their inherent rights of governance and self-determination. There's a lot of work ahead, and it is clear to me that we cannot do the work without building a relationship based on trust. The road we come from is a bumpy one, and we have to make amends for that. While I was in British Columbia recently, I visited the Maski First Nation. Their reserve lands were severed from them in 1908 by railway, and they were never compensated. Chief Alice McKay told me point blank she does not like the word reconciliation. There was no relationship to reconcile, she said. But she also said the settlement gave her hope for our relationship going forward. La résolution de ce genre de...
Resolving claims like this one is how we build trust.
96% de cette estimation sont
96% of these estimates relate to the funding of various settlement agreements aimed at repairing the past.
Much work to do. Reconciliation is not a one-time event. It is a multi-generational journey. The calls to actions are not something that can be checked off a list. They require ongoing and sustained commitment and action. There are real challenges ahead. We have to do more to put an end to the ongoing crisis of missing and murdered, for example. More needs to be done to change to joint decision-making, like the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee. I have now said it many times, the road ahead is long. I'm thankful for the people here in this committee who are as committed to the journey as I am. Together, we will make sure that long roads ends in reconciliation. Miigwech, Kuyanemik, merci, thank you, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Minister. Let's jump right into our first round of questions, and I believe I have Mr. Zimmer up first for 6 minutes. And to say we'll start as soon as Mr. McLeod passes around some of his pizza.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and or Chair, and thank you, ministers, for coming today. There is an affordability crisis in Northwest Territories. Here's a bill from Chris, a local resident in Yellowknife, for one bill, $823.35. That's one bill in January. There's another bill he also received to top up that tank again in January for another $1,128.88 for a total of $1,952.23 for 1 month, Minister, of which $199 of that is a carbon tax, and that is set to go up April 1st, as you know. Next person that from Yellowknife is a person named Adam. He had to fill up his heating oil tank 3 times in January. Once for $499, once for $1,500, once for $730, for a total of $3,203.09. Again, just in January. Carbon tax alone, $319.47. This is from Eric, also from Yellowknife. Sir, this is addressed to me. Sir, in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, I truly thank you for your efforts in the House to enlighten members of the challenge, all Northerners, your constituents as well, I live in Northern BC, to challenges of heating our homes and businesses. As you know, there are many regions that simply do not have heating alternatives to fossil fuels, at least until new technologies offer cost-acceptable alternatives, are the only options we have at the moment. In addition to the add-ons of the carbon tax and the transportation of fuels to northern communities, the tax itself, along with the GST on top of that tax, is driving northern living costs well beyond reasonable financial tolerances, as I just laid out. I know you all know this, but as Northerners, it's difficult to understand how the current Liberal government is so out of touch with the realities of northern living costs. To suggest heat pumps are the answer, as the Liberals have suggested, fine parts for Eastern Canada, they work in some places in Canada, is beyond comprehension. Keep up the good work on behalf of all Northerners and Canadians for that matter. Best regards, Eric. And now we see from the Northwest Territories, we see the new Premier is asking for an exemption because of these high costs to his citizens. Quote, I mean, ideally, a complete exemption for the Territory is what we would hope for, said R.J. Simpson, Premier of the Northwest Territories, just a few months ago, as you probably have heard. As you know, Northwest Territories previously had their residents, they gave their residents rebates, but this your Ottawa Northwest Best government stepped in and would no longer allow Northwest Territories residents to rebate their citizens. This from the Deputy Premier. When the federal government recently made the changes to exempt home heating oil that didn't automatically apply because they've done what they've done, they've changed the goalposts on us. Deputy Premier Wozniak said. And when others were granted a temporary carbon tax exemption on home heating oil and other provinces wanted an exemption, your colleague, Environment Minister Guilbeault, said, sorry, no more exemptions on my watch. From CBC, Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault said he will not stand for any further adjustments to Canada's carbon pricing system. Quote, as long as I'm the Environment Minister, there will be no more exemptions to carbon pricing, Guilbeault told Canadian Press in an interview. My question to you, Minister, is quite simple. Will you support the people of Northwest Territories and their government and exempt them from the carbon tax? Or will you support your colleague, Minister Guilbeault, and his promise as long as I'm the environment minister, there will be no more exemptions to carbon pricing.
Thank you for asking a very fulsome question of almost 4 minutes. So I guess I'm going to get the rest of the time to actually answer without being cut off. I agree with you. There's a real affordability issue in the North and the Arctic. It's not, unfortunately, it's not new, but we're doing our best to address it. When
the question, though, Minister,
that's one of the reasons.
Well, the question, though, Minister, isn't what you're saying, though.
I will answer it, but give me some time. Don't interrupt me.
It's a real simple
Speaker,
question.
Mr.
Do you support the people of Northwest Territories, or will you support your colleague, the Minister of the Environment?
I answer the question in a fulsome way as he asked
as we discussed, we get to ask questions. We need to answer them.
It's a simple.
There's an affordability question.
Simple question.
In
I've
the
stopped
North,
the clock, but and I just asked
why,
to talk over each other. So, Minister, will go to you, and I'll restart the clock with a minute and a half left.
Which is why we brought in $10 a day childcare, something that saves families in Nunavut, in Northwest Territories,
Excuse me, Minister,
in Yukon,
about the carbon
thousands
tax.
of dollars a day. This member and his party voted against it. That's why we
Mr.
brought
Chair,
in dental
he's not
care,
even answering
Mr.
the question.
Speaker,
The question,
for children
Minister,
under
is about
12 years
carbon
old.
tax. Chair, this is my time. He's here to answer our
He's
questions.
interrupting me.
I'm asking a question about the carbon tax, a very clear question, and I'll repeat it because I'll just so you know what the question is. Will you support?
Let me.
It's a carbon tax question.
One person at a time. I'm going to talk now. I'll let you repeat your question.
Sure.
It'll go to the minister.
Well,
I'd say let's afford the minister time
to ask his question. You're going to ask him to repeat it?
Well,
okay, so the question, once again, and just to make it very clear, it makes it really easy to answer it, and you can choose. I gave you two options.
I'm answering your affordability question.
Will you support
to
the people?
Your affordability question.
Mr.
You're not
Minister,
letting me.
I would love to ask you this question again, but you're interrupting me. This is my time, not yours.
You took 4 minutes to ask your question.
This is my time, though.
Let me
6 minutes belongs to me,
Mr. Chairperson.
He obviously doesn't want to answer a carbon tax question, but I will ask you once again: will you, Minister of Northern Affairs, will you support the people of Northwest Territories and specifically exempt Northwest Territories from the carbon tax because they're asking for an exemption? This is the choice you can make as government. Will you support your colleague, Minister Guilbeault, and his promise, as long as I'm the environment minister, there will be no more exemptions to carbon pricing? Which is it, Minister?
Okay, can I answer the question?
Yeah,
please.
There's 15 seconds left, so...
Come on. This is not real.
It's a simple question.
There's an affordability issue in the North. That's why we brought in childcare. He voted against it. That's why we brought in dental care for kids 12 and under. He voted against it. And that's why we brought in the Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted 500,000 children out of poverty. Him and his party voted agast it.
That's what I have to say on affordability.
We're out of time on the first 6 minutes. We're going to go now to Mr. Carr, who I believe is splitting his time with Ms. Gainey. So the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Vandel, thanks for being here. I'm going to take 1/85th of the time to ask my question. Is this real? Minister, I being a little tongue-in-cheek, it's nice to have you here. I wanted to ask a question about Churchill. The town of Churchill in northern Manitoba, as you know, is critical to our province. And I recognize that our colleague, Madame Ashton, has joined. I think she's still with us, has joined us today and, of course, represents the good people of northern Manitoba. Minister, Churchill, through its people, its rail line, its port, plays a critical role in the economic, defense, security of our province and our country, and certainly plays a critical role in terms of our relationship with Indigenous peoples. Can you tell the committee a little bit about some of the most recent investments that the government has made in the town of Churchill and how you see that being critical to the future not only of Manitoba but of Canada as well? Thank you.
Absolutely. That's a very important question for not only for Manitoba but for Canada in the Arctic. First of all, let me back up a little bit. Back when we were elected in 2015 or 2016, the whole railway and port were shut down because the private American owner who owned it simply did not put any money into maintenance. So it had to shut down when there was flooding in northern Manitoba. Climate change is real, especially real in the north. Through leadership of your father, we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars to reopen the rail line, to reopen the port, and we found new owners to operate it, who are First Nation-owned Arctic Gateway Group. It's a collective of First Nations and mayors from small towns in northern Manitoba who've assumed ownership of the Port of Churchill and the rail line that leads up to the port. In fact, we were up there about 1 month ago to announce an investment of another $30 million from the federal government and $30 million from the brand new NDP provincial government. That money will be used to further stabilize the railroad that leads up to the Port of Churchill. There is a new technology they are using. It's called some sort of honeycomb technology that they're building under the rail lines to make sure that the rail line is stable to not only deliver goods to the port, but also accept goods to the port. Through wonderful partnerships with now the province of Manitoba and Arctic Gateway Group, we invested again in the rail line to finish the rail line stabilization. More investment, and I'm proud to say, this summer they will be accepting minerals from northern Manitoba mine and delivering them to the Port of Churchill for export. But not only that, they will be accepting a cruise ship for the first time in quite a while in the Port of Churchill, which will revitalize the community and make sure that it'll be great for tourism. And this is the start of we hope many new business endeavors in the Port of Churchill.
Thanks very much, Minister. I'm very appreciative of your personal support and the support of the government in terms of the development of northern Manitoba. Ms. Gainey, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I met recently with an organization called Avatak, which is located actually in my riding, dedicated to preserving and documenting Inuit art, culture, and archaeological artifacts in Nunavik. Their work is really impressive, and the archives contain really a tremendous collection of Inuit artifacts. But when we're speaking about Canada's north at large, it is an area with obviously unique challenges. You've touched upon them: food insecurity, the impacts of climate change. Arctic and northern research plays a vital role in increasing Canada's knowledge of the Arctic, fighting climate change, and improving the food security in the north. Minister Vandal, can you tell us a little bit about the update and give us an update or give us a sort of a sense of the state of the Canadian High Arctic Research Station?
Yes, that's a great question. I had the pleasure of visiting the Canadian High Arctic Research Station with the Prime Minister, Minister Joly, and also NATO chairperson Jen Stoltenberg recently. And I can tell you there's incredible interest in the High Arctic from many people, many countries, from NATO, and it was a real eye-opener as to the cutting-edge research they are doing at the Canadian High Arctic Research Station. There were researchers there from all over the world who are doing cutting-edge Arctic research. As we know, climate change is very real. It's the North is warming 3 times the rate of the South, and that's really going to threaten a lot of traditional way of life. Not to mention the whole issue of microplastic pollution. There were researchers from Europe doing some incredible research on microplastics in the North that are being found in the ice all over the North, and that's a real concern. The climate crisis is existential crisis for our world, and we need some good northern research that is being done in the High Arctic Research Station.
Great, thank you. We're out of time there, and we're now going to go to Monsieur Lemire, who will have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Ananda Sangari, you are responsible, of course, for the relationship with the Indigenous communities and self-determination has an economic aspect of it. If they have to have all the economic means to develop themselves economically, First Nations and these communities. And there is a young entrepreneur that I met last week, Jason Picard-Pinet, who produces shoes. So the vitality of Indigenous communities is a source of pride, and it is very important to support these communities. Bastien's company was established, and it dates back to the 1800s, and the company was taken over. In 2022, the new ownership came in. They are in the Wendat Nation. So they need, of course, support to continue in their activities, and they are trying to have access to new markets, international markets, and exports. The Can Export program, well, they don't have any exceptions for registered enterprises. So would you be open to introducing an exception to the Act to allow a company like his to have better access to markets, because there are certain exceptions already in place in Canadian heritage?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
Incredible businesses that are being run and started by Indigenous people across Canada. I know very recently there's been a move, especially by the Minister of Trade, who I actually spoke to about this last night, as she goes around the world to promote Canadian businesses. One of the things that she wants to advance is to have Indigenous people as part of her delegation, businesses that can market their products to the world. So to your specific question, I think we can definitely make the connection, and depending on where the opportunities lie and where the interests may lie, we can definitely connect them to the Minister of Trade and her team and Global Affairs to be able to promote the products. With respect to the specific exemption you're looking for, I'm not familiar with that particular issue, but I will be able to get back to you and we can continue this conversation. But there is an obligation, absolutely, to ensure that we support Indigenous entrepreneurs to be able to self-determine their future and to be able to build wealth and intergenerational wealth that will enable them to be fully secure financially and by all other means as well.
Merci, c'est apprécié.
Thank you. It's really appreciated. I would also like to talk about authenticity and appreciation, culturally speaking. In the United States, they have a very strict law to protect industries that produce typically Indigenous products. And Bastien's company have to prove that their products are authentic Indigenous products. And there's an SW Indian Foundation certification. Indian Craft and Act is the law in the United States. So there are calls to action 31.1 and 31.2 that refer to similar measures, but nothing is being done at the moment by Canadian Heritage. So a company like this, how do they make sure that they are really an Indigenous company, so that puts Indigenous entrepreneur in a very disadvantageous position? Would you be open and ready to help such producers and such Indigenous companies that produce typical Indigenous products And will you be willing to work more in line with the appreciation aspect of things?
Look, my role as Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations is to be an advocate, both within government but also outside, to ensure that the Indigenous people not only are able to self-determine and set up their own structures, but also to advocate on their behalf towards structural challenges and limitations that may exist within the Canadian state. So I would look forward to that conversation and to be able to support and work with you as well as the business that you're talking about to be able to obtain the requisite exemptions and recognition that may be required for them to be able to trade, for example, with the U.S. or other markets.
Merci, Miigwech. Un des derniers points.
Thank you. We would also appreciate your contribution when it comes to Indigenous financial institutions. The Wendake has such organization, and they are more involved in long-term financing. Their budget will come to an end on the 31st of March, 2024. They are asking for $154 million to be able to introduce new mortgage programs, and they have a whole host of investment programs in Indigenous communities and in developing businesses there. Would you be open to support these communities and give them a good news as part of the next budget?
We are out of time, but I'll give the Minister a
Par souci de traduction.
brief response.
Par souci de respect pour le délai de traduction.
I mean, just to observe the slight delay with the interpretation, maybe we can give a couple more seconds. Thank you.
So I'm going to invite Deputy Valerie Gideon to respond to this question.
Oui, j'allais juste mentionner que c'est les services.
I just wanted to mention that Indigenous Services Canada, they have more direct financing with NACA, but there are also economic development agencies in the different regions. There's a SEDQ in Quebec that met with NACA. I am the chair of FedNord, the North of Ontario Development Agency. So I would be happy to engage with my colleagues and talk to these agencies to carry our message to these to the people in charge. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ashton, it's now over to you for your 6 minutes.
Thank you. My first question is to Minister INAN Desangri. In the fall economic statement, it became clear that this government is moving away from Indigenous peoples being this government's most important relationship, as you mentioned. Not only is this government cutting funding at a time of great need, but a number of programs are being sunsetted, including those that deal with the harmful and destructive legacy of residential schools. There's currently no plan to fund this program past 2025, and communities are concerned. 3 years ago, Pimicikamak First Nation here in northern Manitoba was clear that they wanted to work with the International Commission on Missing Persons to help them with the searches of the burial grounds of the residential school on their territory. This contract is slated to end this year. Why has your department failed to work with Pimicikamak and the ICMP? And are you willing to extend the programming available to Cross Lake at this time? And I will point out the great irony is that Canada is willing to work with organizations like the ICMP in Ukraine and Iraq, but unwilling to support First Nations who want to work with them here at home. So much for reconciliation. So back to my question, what is your plan to support Pimicikamak and their desire to work with ICMP, as others have expressed as well, given this program being sunsetted?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Ashton. At the outset, let me just say that the work around unmarked graves is critical towards ensuring there's justice, accountability, closure, and ability for communities to heal. ICMP was contracted to do some work for the Government of Canada. It is one of several organizations that are able to support communities. There's been a range of views with respect to individual communities being able to access a type of services, which is essentially DNA testing and additional work around exhumed bodies, and ICMP is one of those players in this space. There are others as well that offer the type of service, and ultimately what it comes down to.
Minister, just to be clear,
if I may respond to Ms. Ashley,
well,
if I may
I'd like you to respond in terms of Cross Lake, not who the other players are. Cross Lake is asked to work with the ICMP, so that's what I'd like to hear about.
So our objective is to ensure that there's self-determination over the type of agency or partner that they want to work with. And if Cross Lake wants to work with ICMP, then that is something that we will facilitate. And there's absolutely no reason why we won't be able to do that. Ultimately, it comes down to the notion of self-determination, and it will be determined on a community-by-community basis based on the wishes of the community.
Thank you very much. I want to turn to Minister Vandal on Nutrition North. In the last fiscal year, Northern Affairs allocated $134 million to Nutrition North, and almost half of that money went to the Northwest Company, a massive corporation that made $119 million of profit last year. The Nutrition North program is supposed to bring down grocery prices for Northerners, but instead we're seeing it help CEOs. According to a recent study at U of T Mississauga, only 67 cents of each dollar in subsidy is passed on from groceries to consumers. People here in northern Manitoba and Nunavut and elsewhere are experiencing significant hardship, and Nutrition North is not working with them, working for them the way it's supposed to. When a family-sized box of cereal is $17.99, a liter of olive oil $36.59, and the list goes on. Presumably, the minister and nobody in the government would tolerate paying this price for their own groceries. So why should Northerners? What is this government doing to address real food insecurity in the North, and also to ensure that Nutrition North funds are not going to line the profits of companies like the Northwest Company?
Great question, MP Ashton. I know that food security is incredibly important to the North. I was in Inuvik, Northwest Territories, back in 2022, and I announced an extra $163 million of new money for Nutrition North. But I'll get right to the issue that was on at APTN about a month ago. And our government is absolutely committed that 100% of the retail subsidy is passed on directly to Northerners. We are committed to that. We have started an internal review of the program. I've personally had a meeting with the researchers who were the researchers who've come up with that analysis, and we will continue to work together. There's an internal review of the program, and once that is done, there will be an external audit of Nutrition North, specifically the retail subsidy. But I can say that Nutrition North is more than just the retail subsidy. We also co-developed the Harvester Support Grant with Northern and Indigenous partners, something that helps and aids Northern partners to go out and hunt, trap, and fish for traditional country foods. It's something that's incredibly popular. It's something, as I mentioned, was co-developed with Inuit and other Northern partners, and it's a way to get traditional foods back into the diets of Northerners. We've also included a community foods program. We're working with schools. We're working with.
We are out of time now, so I'm going to need to move to my next one. Yeah, sorry, Ms. Ashton. Before I go to the next round, which is going to be for 5 minutes, I just want to reinforce that we really can only have one person speaking at a time. It's impossible for the interpreters to do their job if we have people speaking over each other. I would also say that when we have a question asked to the minister, we should give perhaps an equal amount of time for a response and for consideration. But it really is the members' time to control the time slot for their questions where they want to go with it.
I appreciate the equal time, but that's not in the standing orders. It's the actual time is allotted to us as members, and so that's up to us, I guess.
And I'm saying
I hope I get a quick answer.
The other piece is that it is the members' time, and we do generally let the members
point of privilege,
direct when they.
If the member takes 4 minutes to ask a question, a fulsome question on affordability, I should be given 30 seconds to answer without being interrupted.
Well, and I'm just saying that, it is the members' time, but if we're asking questions, we should hear answers, and that's what I'm going to ask that we do here. So I see Mr. Zimmer is up for the next round of questions, and so he has 5 minutes. Watch for the yellow card, because that means we're getting close to the end, and with the red card, we'll cut it off and move on. So, Mr. Zimmer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question I have is, sorry, can I start? I'm not sure if there's a point of privilege being made here or what by somebody. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. And it's been previously just asked by another member from the NDP about food prices in the north. I'm going to specifically be asking you about food prices and the carbon tax, how they affect food prices in Yukon. And I'm going to list some food prices here that I read it out because it's really shocking, like some of the prices that have already been read out today. Now, I'm going to start off. These are compared. These are stats from Yukon specifically. So they're comparative of Alberta, British Columbia, and Whitehorse. Oranges, Alberta, $4.09. British Columbia, $4.38. Whitehorse, $6.12. Potatoes, Alberta, $6.98. BC, $7.04. Whitehorse, $15.85 for potatoes. 3. Alberta, BC again. Alberta for bacon, $7.33 for 500 grams. BC, $7.38 for 500 grams. Whitehorse, $11.17 for the same 500 grams. Let's talk pork chops. 1 kilogram of pork chops in Alberta, $9.46. In BC, it's $9.49. In Whitehorse, it's $15.26. My last product here, steak, sirloin. Alberta, $22, and this is for a kilogram. $22.66 per kilogram in Alberta. BC, it's $24.06. In Whitehorse, it's $35.16 a kilogram. Certainly expensive. I spoke with Mark today. He's a local grocery store in Dawson City. He lives in Dawson City. He goes into work every day to try and keep prices low for his customers. I've seen it with my own eyes. He really works to keep those prices down for his neighbors. But he currently pays a 58% fuel surcharge on every grocery shipment that comes from Edmonton because of the carbon tax. And that will quickly rise to almost 70% on top of already high food prices April 1st. This week, you might have seen it, Minister. Yukon MLA Wade Eschenko made a motion in the Yukon legislature to axe the carbon tax for Yukon because he lives in Yukon and sees for himself the high prices caused by Liberal carbon tax firsthand. Seeing these out of food, I think he sees it himself. It's not like we need to. I live in northern BC. I don't live actually in Yukon to experience that higher prices. We have high prices in northern BC. But he sees them firsthand. He hears from his residents and his constituents really the plight of trying to buy food and keep food affordable in Yukon. So I'll ask this question, Minister, and I hope you can answer it quickly. Will you support the people of Yukon and exempt Yukoners from the carbon tax? Or will you support your colleague, Minister Guilbeault, and his promise, as long as I'm the Environment Minister, there will be no more exemptions to carbon pricing?
I would answer that affordability in the north is a real issue. That's why we are addressing it on many different levels. The price of food is too expensive, but it's simplistic to say that it's only the price on pollution that's causing it. There are many, many variables and factors in the price of food. I travel the north a lot, probably more than you do, and I can tell you that what people talk to me about is the environment. The price on pollution is an environmental plan, along with many, many other initiatives.
But Minister,
Mr. Speaker,
it's not working.
When I go to
an environmental
Northwest
plan, it
Territories,
simply isn't working.
People talk to me about wildfires.
Yeah.
They talk to me about all businesses. 70% of people living in Northwest Territories had to be evacuated.
It's a tax plan, not an environmental plan.
Were shut down.
There's targets that you're setting that aren't even being met in the north.
And it costs literally millions of dollars. It costs Canadians millions of dollars to take care of the repercussions.
You're making life unaffordable for Northerners as it is.
Chair.
I'm just going to stop the clock. There's 45 seconds left.
Our poor translators, how are they able to translate that when they're, this is coming into a debate instead of a question being asked and answered. So let's be respectful of our poor translators who have to go through this.
I just reinforce.
I gave the minister a lot of time to answer my simple question about the carbon tax, and he went on and talked about something else. So I'll ask.
I answered
in my last time
3 minutes of question
that I have. Will you support?
The minister some time. Anyway,
sorry.
There's 45 seconds left, so the floor is over to you.
Thank you. Again, I'll come back to my question. You can answer it with one final simple answer. And it's really between two options. Will you support the people of Yukon and exempt, this is the question, will you exempt Yukoners from the carbon tax, as is being asked, or will you support your colleague, Minister Guilbeault, and his promise, as long as I'm the Environment Minister, there will be no more exemptions to carbon pricing? Simple.
That's not a question. That's a slogan. 8 out of 10 families in Canada receive more money in the rebates.
You know that's not true, Minister.
No, that is true.
It's not
that
true.
Is
you
true.
Know PBO has actually come out and said that it's not true. And you sat in the House like I did today to hear our leader explain exactly why it's not true.
I have a question for you.
True.
If that's not true in 2021, why did you run on a price on pollution?
That's the end of our 5 minutes there.
You.
Okay,
thank
so going to stop there and go next to Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both ministers for joining us here today. My question is to Minister Vandal. Minister Vandal, last summer was a very challenging time for us in Northwest Territories. It was the worst wildfire season we ever seen in our history, the worst one on record for sure. And 3 of our largest communities were evacuated. In fact, 70% of the territory's population was evacuated, and that meant there was huge costs incurred to the government, but also to businesses, and many businesses had to close for a fairly long period of time. I wanted to ask you if you could expand on what supports the federal government has done to help the Northwest Territories recover. But I also want to say thank you for making yourself very available over the summer and responding, especially to me, whenever I picked up the phone, and that was very much appreciated. And my second question is, because we know we're already hearing that this coming summer may be even worse than last summer. We're experiencing drought conditions already. We got very little snowfall on the southern part of the territories, and the government of Northwest Territories is already predicting a very bad fire season. So can you just talk a little bit about what we're doing, what the government is doing to help the territories recover, and what are we doing to try to prepare for this coming fire season?
Thank you so much for that important question. And I know that last year I was in Inuvik with the Premier and Premier of Yukon, the Premier of Northwest Territories, and that was just the beginning of the wildfires that had already started, but it was just near the beginning. And I tell you, the smoke was so thick that we had to get out of Inuvik much earlier than planned, and that was just the beginning. Things got significantly worse than that. So I really felt for the people who, the older people, the elders, the youth, people in hospitals who had to be moved. I thank you for your advocacy, your help. We were on the phone many times, and not just to me, to many other ministers. Our government stepped up right away to help residents evacuate and return home. We provided across Canada, I think, $300 million to help provinces and territories increase firefighting resources, of which $28 million specifically to support the Northwest Territories wildfire response. I know that eventually, and I did visit some of the folks from Northwest Territories in Edmonton, and it was good to touch base with them and talk to them with the Premier of NWT. Eventually, when they opened up, CanNor was there with a significant amount of funding for businesses to open up again and to recoup some of their losses. And speaking with Minister Sajan, who played a very important role, I know that they've trained a significant amount of Northwest Territory firefighters to prepare for next year, and we hope that next year is not as bad as last year. But it all comes down to we need a credible climate plan. And the price on pollution that we are implementing is a significant part of that credible climate plan. There's many other initiatives that are included, climate adaptation. There's a lot of initiatives that are included in that. But that's something that our government is addressing head on. That's something that the party on the other side of the lobby really have no plan. And that's something that we're going to keep moving. We're going to work cooperatively with the territorial government, with First Nations, with the Indigenous nations that live there. We're going to have their backs in the upcoming year.
And we're at the end of the time there. We're going to go now to Monsieur Lemire, who will have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Anna Lasangeri, I'd like to ask you 2 quick questions. If you can answer them quickly, that'd be really appreciated. When it comes to the lack of legislation on First Nation policing services, we have to recognize that these are essential services, and we need resources and financing for Indigenous policing services. They need the infrastructure, the personnel, and they do not always have access to these things. When can we expect a bill to allow these essential services?
Minister LeBlanc is charged with co-developing legislation on First Nations policing, and I believe his department's undertaking consultations on how to move forward. It's in terms of timelines, I can't give you. It is something that you should pose to Minister LeBlanc, but it is very much part of his mandate to be able to develop and to ensure that there's First Nations-led policing within communities.
Merci, vous soulignez.
Thank you. You were underlining the importance of consultation with First Nations in your answer. There is an issue that's impacting one of my communities in my riding, and of course many other communities. The Chalk River facility, nuclear waste storage facility, some communities are against the construction, and the matter will be taken to the courts to suspend the construction of this facility. Do you think that the procedure was done properly and with consultation in mind, especially in this time of reconciliation?